Hey, world, what up? So we've been pretty much around a month into the NBA season as we're starting the NBA Cup, quote unquote, pre-tournament, as we're jumping into there. And looking into the NBA landscape in both the Western Conference and Eastern Conference, there's a couple of teams that come to mind who've been the top of the hierarchy, right? In the Eastern Conference, you do have the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Cleveland with a 13-0 record, starting at a hot streak. Boston, who's pretty much been top heavy, but lost around 2 games or so. And the rest of the Eastern Conference is abysmal. You either have teams who are 500 or less, and disappointments within the Eastern Conference within that side. Teams such as the New York Knicks, who have a losing record as of right now. The Indiana Pacers, same thing. The Milwaukee Bucks at a 4-8 record, who won back-to-back games. The Philadelphia 76ers with their health issues, and who had a 2-9 record, bottom of the Eastern Conference. And the Magic would the Magic are at a fine record right now at 7-6 at the third seed, but Paulo Banchero, after having that huge game, has missed around at least around 4 or 5 games or so. So pretty much what I'm saying is I don't expect anyone in the Eastern Conference as of right now to pretty much our top favorite heavies to win the NBA championship. I'm not gonna be premature and jump too much out of gun. Last season was the Boston Celtics. Boston is at a 10-3 record as of right now. Let's see what happens to them. Cleveland, I do expect that team to pretty much be somewhat like an Atlanta Hawks at a 20 the 2015 season when they were top heavy at a number 1 seed. I think they had a 61-21 record somewhere along those lines and got bounced in the Eastern Conference and swept by LeBron James and the Cavaliers. The Eastern Conference is not top heavy. Only the teams as Boston Celtics. Let's see what happens with Cleveland and also with Orlando getting back to being healthy and Philadelphia and New York. Shifting over to the Western Conference and pretty much for today's segment, looking into Zion Williamson and the New Orleans Pelicans. Now the Pelicans are at a 3-9 record at the bottom of the East or the Western Conference at a 14th seed. And they've lost 9 out of their last 10 games. And the West is top heavy as it is to begin with. New Orleans has been New Orleans has been a franchise. Their best years were with Chris Paul, and you did have Byron Scott as your head coach. You had David West on that team, Peja Stojakovic, Tyson Chandler. Made a couple of playoff appearances, but nothing too much too in depth when it comes to the playoffs. Looking in advance in a couple more years when it comes down to that. You did have a couple years of Alvin Gentry as your head coach, bringing in Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday. They had one second round appearance, which then they lost to if I'm not mistaken, the Golden State Warriors in the second round. I believe that was back in 2016 or so. And then you had a couple of seasons with Anthony Davis to where then AD was one of the best defensive bigs in the league. People expect him to be the face of the league, but they pretty much were not able to get past that first, second round aspect. And they were pretty much middle of the ground, mid team in the Western Conference, which the West has pretty much been top heavy against the Eastern Conference for pretty much around 8 to 9 out of the last 10 years or so. Moving a little forward, then you're in the area to where Anthony Davis was traded off with. You brought in Stan Van Gundy for one season, to where you drafted, or you made the trade to where you were able to bring in Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram. You were able to draft Zion Williamson at your number 1 pick. You had J.J. Redick to bring in as a veteran. You had Steven Adams, and that team was able to not make any noise. And there was injuries when it comes down to it. They let go of the Lonzo Ball experiment, and they pretty much had the foundation of building for the last 4 or 5 seasons with Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. Throughout the past couple of years, you did bring in Willie Green as your new head coach, who is the current head coach as of right now. And New Orleans has either been a team to lose in the first round, in around 4 or 5 games or so, or they're able to not make the NBA playoffs. And that's left question marks to Zion Williamson due to his health. If Brandon Ingram is that quote unquote leader or top guy heavy to build a team around, he is at 26 years of age, entering his, I believe he's been around 8 or 9 seasons in the NBA. And that's a lot of question marks to what's going to happen with the Pelicans. You made a trade this offseason for Deontay Murray, who then is out for the past 3 weeks, who's pretty much going to be out until after Thanksgiving. CJ McCollum, you were able to bring him in 2, 3 seasons ago to bring in that veteran experience. But with anything, they were able to make one playoff appearance in the first round. He's out for the next week or two. And this team has injuries throughout. Now that leaves some question marks towards the New Orleans Pelicans and Zion Williamson, who are sitting at the bottom of the Western Conference, which teams expected them to at least, this would be the season for them to at least get to the second round and make a push. It's still early in the NBA season, but things are not looking good in New Orleans. Let's jump in here and give more of our take into Zion and the Pelicans.
What y'all do with Zion? So far this season, he's missed games with an illness, right hamstring tightness, left hamstring soreness, right hamstring soreness, and left hamstring tightness. So both of his hammies are going through some stuff where he can be a late scratch on any night. So far this season, I would say he's been underwhelming, 40% from the field for somebody that's really dunks and layups. How do y'all navigate the Pelicans' future?
I think.
Well, to begin with, this franchise is not where it needs to be. If I'm looking into the New Orleans Pelicans, they're at middle of the pack type team, which they're in a weird conundrum, right? Brandon Ingram is not that quote unquote mini Kevin Durant type of player. He's pretty much the Wiz Khalifa of the NBA. Very lackadaisical. He's not a leader for your team. He's been in the NBA for around 7 or 8 seasons or so. He's not a quote unquote leader. He needs to be your number 3 guy, if anything. And with Brandon Ingram, he's at 1 year left of his contract at $36 million. The Pelicans are not a top-heavy free agents team out in the market, so expect the Pelicans to throw out around a 4 or 5 year max contract towards Brandon Ingram. But he's not the go-to guy. Zion Williamson, they expected him to be that guy, the next generational talent. But right now he's out for a sore right hamstring. And if I'm looking at Zion Williamson and the whole aspect of the NBA, he's at 280 at 6'6", playing a 4, sometimes even a 5 when it comes down to this team. Zion Williamson's only played 6 games of the season at 23 points and 8 rebounds. Now, when Zion Williamson is playing top-heavy in the NBA, he's an all-star. And the Pelicans are one of the top teams in the Western Conference, if so. But this experiment after 5 seasons or so is not going the way it needs to be. There needs to be question marks if you're the head management of the Pelicans to pretty much take another year for Zion Williamson, try to build a team around him, or just let him go and make that trade to quote-unquote rebuild. Other question marks within this team, you did bring in CJ McCollum and Dejounte Murray to be pretty much those veterans to let these young guys flourish, and they're both hurt and injured right now. My predictions and projections before the NBA season for the Pelicans, as heavily constructed and healthy within their roster, pretty much to be around a 6 seed or so. A first or second round exit, most likely to losing 6 or 7 games in the first round, depending on their matchup. Nothing too much when it comes down to it. It's been too long within that core of Zion Williamson and with Brandon Ingram.
They are in a weird spot to where, like, sure, they do have to make a decision. They have to make this big decision this offseason when you're talking about with Brandon Ingram.
They made it already.
But also, I don't think, when you look at this team, I don't think Zion has shown me enough to where, like, he is my one that's going to catapult me into being, like, this championship contending team. So, like, I think they're in just this, like, this weird, they're going to be in this weird purgatory.
Now, you're in a weird position with Zion because he's pretty much like a, how do I explain? A combination like a Draymond Green, a Jaren Jackson Jr., and Julius Randle type player that you want to make him your one, but he's undersized as a 4. He is dominant, but he cannot be your number 1 option. And that's been proven so, not only by his health, by his quote-unquote leadership and demeanor, which are not there. Brandon Ingram cannot be your number 2. So that means a particular situation to where if you're going to keep Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, you need to bring a player to be as your number 1 guy, preferably a veteran type player who's around 28 to 31 years of age, to pretty much either play as that, pretty much a forward type. And I'm going to think about a couple players here in a couple seconds that can kind of fill in who would be an ideal fit when it comes down to that. Now, the Pelicans, as we're looking at their team, you are able to potentially, and I know it's early, but they already brought him in, CJ McCollum, Dejounte Murray. If I'm CJ McCollum, if I'm keeping him on the team, he needs to play as my 6th man. He's not a starter anymore for a championship contending team with aspirations. He's undersized at a 2 at 6'3", at 190. He's 32 years of age. He's got 2 years left in my contract, around $32 million. If I have CJ McCollum as my 6th man, that is an ideal punch. Keep Brandon Ingram at the 3. have Zion Williamson at the 4. Right now, they have no centers for the Pelicans, so I don't know what head management is doing. They're starting Daniel Tice at the 5, which is not ideal. And they've even had some other couple scenarios of bringing in Trey Murphy to come start, as well as Herb Jones playing the 5, which is not ideal. You do not want this team to be 6'7" and play that small ball. This is not the 2020. This is not the 2020 Houston Rockets where you had PJ Tucker playing the 5 at 6'5". That's not happening.
Where they're gonna be, I think Zion's good enough to have you okay and solid, but like you're never gonna be that team that's favored to win.
And listen, if the Pelicans could fill in their starting 5 in a more formidable way, I think they'll be in a better position. They don't have any 5s as of right now, so you need to keep Zion at the 4. You need to put at your 5. You need to make a trade and bring in players such as a Jonas Valanciunas. I think someone who fit in very well in the starting 5. If you can bring in Nicholas Claxton from the Brooklyn Nets, I think he'd play off very well with Zion Williamson. He's a very jumpy, bouncy 6'11" center who's young in age, to where he can help out, just not to score formally, but just be a great defensive player, catch the lob, especially in transition, and bring that defensive presence when it comes down to that team. Trying to think of other centers. If you bring in someone like Clint Capella, I don't think that would be too formidable. He's around 31 years of age, and I can't really see that too much. But they need to bring in a 5 if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. Keep Zion at the 4, bring him at the 3. When Dejounte Murray comes back, leave him at the 1. I'm running Herb Jones at the 2, and I'm bringing CJ McCollum off the bench to be my 6th man. I think this would be more of a formidable starting 5, traditional starting 5 within this team. And let's see how Dejounte Murray, plays off within this team. If it really doesn't work out, this could be pretty much not a Hail Mary, but potentially could work is later around the trade deadline. Make a trade to bring in Ben Simmons as your 1. You can let go of Dejounte Murray, but you need to bring in some other trade packages along with Ben Simmons. If you can get a Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton for Dejounte Murray, and potentially maybe like a Trey Murphy, and potentially Daniel Tice, somewhere where the contracts match, that could be somewhat affordable. Now, there's a lot of question marks with Ben Simmons, who does not have the highest mentality of pretty much being a quote-unquote leader, but at 6'10", at 27 years of age, the Pelicans would be a defensive monster. If they have a Ben Simmons at the 1, Herb Jones at the 2, if he's not in that trade comparison, you can have Ingram at the 3, Zion at the 4, and then Nicholas Claxton at the 5. That would be ideal when it comes down to it. But we have to see what happens with the other trademarks. And if you can still retain CJ McCollum as your 6th man, watch out for the Pelicans. But that's just something that comes in my mind as right now. But knowing the management for the Pelicans, they're not going to address the center issue. I can just tell how it is. They're injury prone. This team will pretty much be a playing team, if anything. If not, if they continue down that rabbit hole of injuries, there's going to be a very heavy offseason for them.
And laugh at the Clippers, but they didn't really do anything wrong.
Only thing I think they did wrong, there's 2 things. Giving Kawhi that extension that damn early. There's really no reason to give him that much money in January. And then
That reminds me of the Dak Prescott, Jerry Jones situation within right there. Kawhi Leonard has a year or 2 left till he's going to retire in the NBA. Now he wants to keep playing to get that cash. I know he's got around 3-4 years left of that contract, but at a point, Steve Ballmer, knowing that Kawhi Leonard's not going to play this season, if any so, no, he's going to be out.
say the second one is that wrong because James Harden's got them at least competent. They paid James Harden a lot of money. Yeah. Everything else, any other GM would have done. If you telling me the dude
that
coming off
contract ain't that long either.
No, it's not. If you told me the dude coming off the Finals MVP wanted to come to your team, you're gonna say yes. And he wants to bring the dude who was 3rd in MVP this season. You're gonna say yes to that, and you're gonna continue to throw fuel at the fire because this is a rare occurrence. So I don't think they've done a lot of things wrong. It just didn't play out the way anybody expected.
Yeah. And I think it's the same. It's kind of like with the Pelicans, going back to them. Me personally, what I would do is I would ride it out because we are 8 games into the season. Obviously, it's not the start you would want to see, not even from a wins-loss perspective, but from the team perspective, because DeJounte is hurt, CJ is hurt, Herb is hurt. When you have all of this, I think you have to be a little patient and not panic, especially because everybody in the NBA outside of the Cavs and the Thunder and the
Celtics.
Celtics, nobody's having like rock star status starts. So like you don't really have to panic yet. It ain't like they having a Bucks type start. What is their record? 3-4, 4,
Right now they are
2-5?
sitting at 3-7.
3-7. They played 10 games.
Yes,
Damn, they
have,
got to be
yeah.
at the most games.
Four-game losing streak right now.
It's so weird how some teams have played 10,
Yeah.
like them, but then some of them only play like 7.
7 or 8. So yeah, I mean, again, this is not the greatest start. I thought that record was a little bit better, but 4-game losing streak. I mean, I guess you would expect that to happen. You just have to kind of play it out because they've tried. They went out and got DeJounte Murray. They went out and got CJ. You know what I mean? They nailed it with the Trey Murphy Jr. pick. They nailed it with the Herb Jones pick.
Trey Murphy's supposed to potentially return Monday.
Yes.
You got to get these guys healthy and really take a glance at the team. I think some of the things that we'll consider as mistakes, we would have made the same ones, and I think only hindsight is going to call those mistakes.
Yeah.
But I think they really committed their team without giving it a fair look because of the money. But I think you were supposed to evaluate this team with Brandon Ingram before you got too sure that you didn't need him, because Brandon Ingram has been your best player this season,
Yeah,
and he is probably a guy that is playing himself into a nice-ass contract on behalf of y'all playing around with his money. So when he goes into the open market,
it's the most wonderful time.
With Verizon, trade in any phone, any condition, and get iPhone 16 Pro with Apple Intelligence on us. For everyone in the family. Only on Verizon.
somebody's going
And again, with the Pelicans, they have a strong core foundation, which is fine enough with Zion, Brandon Ingram. Those are the top two heavy. And Brandon Ingram's been pretty much adorable. You can trust him for around 70% of the time. Zion's the question mark. I'm not going to fold on Zion because he has a heavy talent. He's at 24 years of age. And he's a dominant all-star whenever he does play. So I'll still hold on Zion if I'm the Pelicans as of right now. But you need to build a team around them. So you made the right picks with Herb Jones, who's a 6'7" forward who can play the 2 and the 3. I think sometimes they've been trying to move him at the 5. So I need to keep Herb Jones as my starting 2 to be a defensive-minded player within there. He needs to work on his jump shot a little more, hitting the outside range, to be determined. Trey Murphy, the 3rd. He's a great pick to come off my bench if I'm the New Orleans Pelicans. They need to focus on getting a starting 5 of bringing in a true dominant center. You saw what the Mavs did last year, having Dwight Powell who's starting, and they were able to move him off to make some trades to get Daniel Gafford. And look, the Mavericks were one of the best defensive teams and made it to the NBA Finals, make that deep playoff run. The Pelicans are not too far off with a couple of these teams. If they make some minor tweaks at a starting 5, they should focus on Nicholas Claxton as much as possible as they can to bring him in to make that trade. They have the trade assets. Again, Jonas Valanciunas, who's another starting 5 out there on the market. Clint Capella, bring in a number 5 and fill out that bench for the 5s as well. Right now you have Daniel Tice, you have Neves Missy, and they have Trey Jemison the 3rd. Daniel Tice could be as your 3rd center coming off here. You need to have a true starting 5. So that's number 1. If they can bring in that 5, keep Zion at the 4, Brandon Ingram at 3. You have Trey Murphy coming off the bench for Brandon Ingram. At the 1, you have Dejounte Murray. He's going to come back with Alvarado at the 1 backup. They need another true backup point guard. I would bring in Patrick Beverly, who is dominating overseas. They need more of a veteran presence to fill in with these young guys. And that's what it comes down to. If you have a bunch of young guys out there who are building themselves up, who don't have too much playoff experience, you bring in veterans to come off the bench. That's the perfect mix. And then at the 2, I'm having Herb Jones starting. I'm going to have CJ McCollum come off the bench. He would boot, number 1, I believe he would win 6th man of the year. Number 2, they need to have a defensive-minded team, right? Dejounte and Brandon Ingram can run the offense. You can have Herb Jones playing the 2, who's going to be a defensive-minded player off the wing. Zion Williamson is already a defensive monster at the 4, who's great on offense as well. If you have Nicholas Claxton at the 5, that's defensive-minded. You're going to have the right mix and mash. I do have question marks on Willie Green. I've never been the biggest fan of him as the head coach. I got to think of other head coaches out there in the market. They'll probably let it run. But this team's just, they can fill those holes, and then injuries come and play. It's still early in the season. It's not even Thanksgiving yet. Let's see what happens with New Orleans. But they have great potential with this team.
be there for him. And if you worried about paying him, my concern is If you're worried about paying him and you don't want to, then what do you do when you trade him? Because you're probably, if you traded him, you're not trading him for nothing. He's going to bring back something that's going to cost as well. So I mean, I don't know where you go.
And a potential another starting center I kind of thought of as well, and I got really have to think about this a little more, but DeAndre Ayton with the Portland Trailblazers, which Portland's really not going anywhere. The Blazers at the 13th seed at a 5-8 record. Let's see what happens with Portland, but DeAndre Ayton is a very underrated center, and Ayton's around like 26 of age, somewhere around there. He fits the timeline of the New Orleans Pelicans.
And they're one of those weird teams where it feel like they missing things, but they got a lot at the same time.
They got a lot of talent.
They had a lot at the same time. So I don't really know.
And again, the missing items they're missing are the plug and players to fill in these holes. Right? They need a starting center with a backup as well. Maybe even bring in a stretch forward to come off the bench for Zion Williamson. And then at the 1, you do have Dejounte Murray and Alvarado, but if you can bring in Patrick Beverley as well, that would be a formidable team. They need further veterans. They need a starting center.
I don't know. But I definitely think they have to be patient because when they are.
No, they've been patient enough. This experiment happened after the Anthony Davis trade in 2020. We're now around 4 to 5 seasons after that. The Pelicans have only made the playoffs twice, lost in the first round twice, and there wasn't even really deep series when it comes down to it. Due to other injuries, they lost to the play-in tournament, or they didn't make it around twice. No, this is around Zion Williamson's 5th season in the NBA, Brandon Ingram's 8th or 9th. This is unacceptable. They need to at least get a second round appearance, if anything.
Healthy, they look promising.
I know, but when you talk about being patient, a lot of those guys are out for weeks. Like, I don't.
What's the other option?
No, they literally don't have an option. But it's like they're gonna be so deep in a hole, probably like record wise, that it's gonna be like, damn, how the hell they gonna come out of this?
Yeah.
It's gonna take a drastic turn. Like they gonna have to go on like a 10, 12 game win streak, or like win like 20 out of their last. Like
And
30
3 and
30.
7. If you're in the Eastern Conference, you're 1 game out of the play-in.
Yeah, because the Knicks are 4-4 and we comfortable. But if you look at the
And if you look at the West right now, this West teams are deep. They're not playing around. Listen, you got the Thunder who are top heavy, the Golden State Warriors who are shocking everyone at a 9-2 record. The Suns are shocking people at a 9-3 record. The Houston Rockets, an underrated team at 8-4, who are the 5th seed. The Lakers, which I was very surprised, who are a 7-4 record at the 6th seed. The Grizzlies are coming up. You have a bunch of young teams coming up. I mean, the Spurs are at 500 right now. The Pelicans, if they're going to lose a bunch of games due to injuries to beginning with, it's going to be hard to climb up. The West is not a joke. Watch out for New Orleans. See what they can come with.
Western Conference, they're 3-7 and they right above the Jazz. So they're 14th in the conference right now. But again, they are not that far back from everybody else.
2.5 games.
Yeah,
to get back
2.5
into the
games.
mix.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying because they're out
72
weeks
games left.
and they're already on a 4-game loop.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave it off here. 10 games in the NBA season. We're 1/8 into it. The Pelicans are in a peculiar situation as right now. There's injuries. They've not addressed the center issue, which hasn't happened. I say as right now, they need to stay put as they're at within their core foundation. They need to look and bring in a starting center and a backup as well. If I'm making a big move, I'm eyeing for Nicholas Claxton of the Brooklyn Nets. If not him, may have to bring back Jonas Valanciunas from years ago, or as well as look at Clint Capella and DeAndre Ayton. As well as my second move, bring in CJ McCollum when healthy, coming off the bench to play as that 6-man role, which is perfect and ideal for him in this situation. Having Herb Jones starting as my 2, Ingram at the 3, Dejounte Murray when healthy at the 1, Zion at the 4, and then if you can have Nicholas Claxton or one of those trade assets at the 5, this team will be pretty much dominant enough to pretty much build their back way up and bring my respect. But looking at New Orleans management, they're pretty much clueless when it comes to these other items, but maybe surprise. We'll see. All right.